Hello, and welcome to the premiere episode of the Single Malt Review. We are your hosts, Dave,
Tim,
and Sam. And throughout this series we'll be bringing you our amateur aficionados' insights into the wonderful world of whiskey, everything from Scotch to bourbon and much, much more besides. Now, to get things off to a fine and flying start, I'll hand you over to Tim, and a true classic Scotch, Macallan.
No, very classic. A lot of people would say very collectible, unless you were me, and I would say highly delicious, but we will find that out in due course. So it is Macallan, it's a Highland, it's 22 years old, single cask, bottled by Adelphi, independent bottlers, 56%, and bottle number 1 of 193. So not a great many to go across the whole world, but we've got one, so that's okay. Now, just looking at this and giving it a quick... Oh yes. Now I can be quite sure this is a sherry whiskey. You can tell by that lovely, lovely rich colour there. And I think from a remade hogshead, because you would be hard-pressed losing that much whiskey out of a sherry butt. I would expect more like 300 bottles at least out of a sherry butt, even after 22 years. 56%, it has come down a fair way, but it's still pretty jolly strong compared to most whiskies. That is, for those of you in the new country, I've forgotten the proof.
It'll be 112.
112 proof. So, pretty strong. Anyway, we'll rip into it and see what we have. As you can see, I've had to investigate that a few times prior to our screening, but never mind. Quality
research
control
is essential.
It is. And there we can see good solid character, lovely foam already. So, oh yes,
That is profoundly sweet on the nose, in toffee and citrus, but it's some spicy notes, cloves and ginger.
Well, I've got a bit of sort of dark wood varnish there.
I think a lightly toasted note slightly in there.
A little bit of peel. And there's a cooling element right in the back, like a slight menthol. Not quite eucalyptus, but...
That could be what my senses are telling me is cloves.
No, definite bit of cooling. It's quite a hot day, and we're getting quite a bit of alcohol just on the end. Not a great deal, but just a wee bit of burn creeping in on the back. Not too unusual considering the strength. 56% that's a lot of whiskey. No, I tend to give it a little bit of water if I end up with a cask that's really over 50%. It's kind of the line that gets to be awful hot stuff.
And Adelphi, famous independent bottlers, choose individual casks which then do not dilute down before bottling. So this is
So it's as it comes.
straight from the box, right out of a tin, as it were.
Undiluted, unchill filtered.
No chill filtration here. They wouldn't do that to us. Now it even says there, always look for that on your bottle. Unchill filtered, natural strength. So that's how you know it's a real single cask. Tiny bit of paper filtration just to get the bitties out, but otherwise, otherwise,
A very smooth
as the
drop.
whiskey intended.
Yes, add that initial 56% alcohol by volume. That is fiery. I'm getting a slight taste of chili peppers. It's very warming, really fills you up.
No, it
Smooth
does
and
have
sweet, but
It
not.
does have a little bit of a catch.
Absolutely, I agree with that, yes.
It's remarkably dry. After that sweet nose, it's quite a woody dryness on the palate. It's quite a juxtaposition. Definitely wants a wee spot of water.
I will.
That's rather good.
There's a certain viscosity to it. There's a lot going on in there. You can see it's a thick, syrupy whiskey.
No, it's a good whiskey, and it's very uncommon whiskey for a few reasons. I mean, Old Macallan, by any means, is not easy to find, and it's astonishingly expensive as well. Old Macallan is some of the most exclusive stuff you can buy, and this is Old Macallan, and it's also interesting because it's Macallan very much as it used to be. Macallan of probably only 20 years ago was almost exclusively sherry matured. It was one of the old stalwarts of the sherried style, and many of the whiskies and the popularity that built that name up, built that brand up, was the sherried style, which got terribly, terribly popular and unsurprisingly ran out. So modern Macallan is very, very different. Much modern Macallan now, their fine oak range, and even some of their in-house single casks are now bourbon matured, like most whiskey. Nothing wrong with it, certainly, but it does mean it is quite a different animal to the Macallan of a few decades ago. But this is a bit of a time capsule, because this goes all the way back to 100% sherry matured, and Macallan quite possibly as it used to be.
Speaking of
it's lovely stuff.
Different animals, with the addition of a little water, this beast has taken on a whole new character. It's still very warming, really lights a fire in you, but now I'm getting some marmalade-y, spicy, dry, some sweet, sharp fruit flavours, like a nice bitter marmalade.
No, it's still dry, but the water it's opened it up dramatically, and it does much, much better for it.
The dry finish puts me in mind of a fairly dry white wine. Just seems to evaporate off the tongue, leaving none of it lingering sweetness behind. Just a toasty, bitter citrus peel feel.
Oh, and speaking of Macallan as a changing whiskey, it may change yet again because they have rebuilt the distillery quite recently. They've gone quite technologic. They've got a new sort of underground bunker system. Looks a bit like hobbit holes, where it's all underground. And yes, we'll be a few years down the track before we see some of the mature make coming out of the new plant. And of course they'll keep the stills and do their very best to maintain the style, but whenever distilleries change as radically as Macallan is changing, there's always a chance that the character of the spirit will change. So in a
they're
few
running
years,
the original stills, just they've shifted them underground?
I think they've built more, they've rearranged the plant, and well, they've proceeded from there. And like I say, it'll be many years before we see mature spirit from that new plant. So who knows? They will do their damnedest to keep consistency, which is very much what they want to achieve. So we may see no change at all. No, Macallan, it only very, very rarely shows up in independent bottles. This is probably the first one I have seen in a good 2 years of whiskey shopping that wasn't, something I would need a mortgage to purchase. This was actually extremely reasonable. You'll find that with independent bottles, you'll often find you get a lot more whiskey for your buck than ones from the standard range, because you're not paying for that gigantic marketing machine which powers a lot of the rather classy brands. So one of the more well-known and more well-available independent bottlers, not the most prolific, that would be the now split Lang Brothers companies, Old Malt Cask and Old Particular, which I'm sure we will have some inevitably in a later episode. But now Adelphi has been pottering away in their lovely Glenborrow Castle, and in fact building their own distillery, which is tremendously exciting. I think they may have actually produced some spirit just in the last year or so. They had a bit of trouble getting it up and running, but they're good to go now, and so we will be, for the first time in a very long time, since the old distillery rather exploded, be seeing Adelphi Single Malt. It'll be a very exciting time.
Only 2 years to go.
Theoretically, yes, before we see something.
Something we could legally call whiskey.
I'm not sure if they'll release a 3-year-old. They probably will, because people will be absolutely asking for it. But no, we will see. Very exciting times on the Adelphi whiskey front.
As an ardent fan of Highland Scotch whisky, I mean, my favourites being from the Highlands, I'm pleased. This is less sweet than I'm used to, perhaps less sweet than I enjoy, but this is a robust, very warm, very filling whisky. It's got a lot of character and a lot going on. It's perhaps a little dry for my taste, but then taste is subjective, that's just my taste.
It's dry, but it's generous. There's plenty in there.
I think the dryness and sweetness works too well together, really. You get that cycle going and constantly switching between the two.
No, it'd be very good. With a bit of hard cheese, you'd be away, I think. But perfectly alright just on its own. No, magnificent after-dinner whiskey, this one. Lovely stuff.
It'd be enjoyed very nicely with a cheese board and some dried fruit.
Delightful. And it may be a very, very long time before I find another old Macallan, so we'll enjoy this one. Not an easy whiskey to come by any means. No, indeed, it's very sad. Well, I think that just about wraps it up.
Yes, all that remains are the numbers. If we were to assign a numerical score, say from 1 to 10 in traditional fashion, why don't you start us off, Tim? You introduced the whiskey.
I think this is probably an 8 out of 10 whiskey for me. It's very good. It's not the best whiskey I've ever tasted, but it's a solid dram. It's worth its cost. No, 8 out of 10 for me.
I'd agree, 8 out of 10 as well. It's a fine example of Macallan. It is a fine example of a Scotch whisky. I'd rate it higher if it was more in keeping with the Highland style that I'm used to. Perhaps a sweeter, with more of that sherry influence, perhaps. But then, it's hard to find any fault with it. It's very enjoyable. It is a fine, well-rounded whisky. It's robust. It's fortifying. It's hearty.
What are you going to give it, Sam?
Well, just to be different, I think I'm going to say 8. I do enjoy it. It's well balanced. It's good. It's got a good fiery alcohol, but it is kept down by the flavours. I think it works really well.
Well, a consistent score for a consistent dram.
And on those notes, it is time for us to say goodbye. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again soon for another dram. Stay safe. See you next time.
Slàinte.